I am thrilled that today's guest, and I don't use this word a lot, the great Peggy Noonan. I've been a fan of hers. I've had a crush on her for a long time, and I don't mean that inappropriately. I just think she is brilliant and wonderful and funny and beautiful. She is the Pulitzer Prize-winning opinion columnist of the Wall Street Journal. Her column Declarations has run for almost 25 years now. That's incredible. Her new book, A Certain Idea of America, selected columns, takes some of her greatest hits and brings them to life. She wrote and worked for both Reagan and George H.W. Bush, where she coined a kinder, gentler nation. And what would be what we are right now as opposed to a kinder, gentler nation as we head into Trump's second term? Do we have a new phrase?
A nation split in two that I think would love to feel not so estranged from each other, each half. But you know, when we mention the old days, George H.W. Bush and Reagan, we are talking the days of big landslides and winning 45 states or 49 states out of 50 and winning the popular vote by 8 or 9 points. So those days, for America are gone. It's in some ways a more struggling country in terms of trying to get to the same place and thinking about issues. I'm well aware that's a boring thing to say, but I think it's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the Trump team, and many are calling this a landslide. Yes, it was an electoral landslide, but basically there was a one point difference in the popular vote, and basically there were about 230,000 votes in the swing states. If they went the other way, out of 150 million, would have been pushed this in the other direction. So to your point, we are divided. We are, there's two ways of looking at this. And you and I both talked very briefly before the election. We both felt this was going to go Trump's way, and not that we were any brilliant thinkers. In hindsight, that kind of seems obvious now. There's two ways to look at this, and people are looking at it both ways. If you're on the side that you're worried about a Trump presidency, there are those that are worried and said they're going to take him at his word. And a lot of the authoritarian things he talked about that he's going to do, whether it's going after enemies or using the military, all those things. And then there are those that are more hopeful and say, you know what, he doesn't have any wind going against him, that he has the chance to be great. He has the chance to really, he's got the country behind him. He's got the country behind him right now, and that he will govern the right way. Is that just very kind of silly, hopeful thinking?
Well, I'll tell you what my concern is. First of all, the people have spoken. As
yes.
You note, this is still, that landslide is a ridiculous word to use about this moment. We're a 50-50 country. We were in 2022, 2020 also, and we were before that. We've been a 50-50 country for some time. So this would be a wonderful time for the politics of persuasion to return, by which I mean too many of our politicians get up and they declare what they're about or what they want or who they are, and then you're supposed to follow them. How about persuading them instead, saying, this is where I stand, this is why, this is what I think we ought to do, come with me. So that's sort of one piece of the big puzzle, to my mind, why we don't do that more often. I also think there's a little chance in the future presidents come in now and misread their mandates. First of all, they all claim a mandate. And second
Sure.
of all, they think it's huge. So will Trump never had to be told anything was huge before, right?
By the way, even
it's
when he
all
lost,
huge.
He thought he had a mandate when he lost. So,
yeah. What I keep in mind, what I am always anxious about, I'm not at all opposed to boldness. I'm not opposed to creativity. When I hear that a highly individualistic and kind of visionary thinker like Elon Musk is going to be taking a look at this regulatory government that we have and its 800 million pages of regulations and its redundancies and its sloth and the fact that no one's ever been able to get their hands around the government in decades. When I hear that, I can't help but feel hopeful. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
something good will come of that. At
Mm-hmm.
the same time, I always keep in my mind the events of January 6, 2021. It was a wicked day in our history and a terrible thing. And I and if you feel that, if you feel it was a terrible thing and a real sin against our history, then I think you can't just mindlessly go forward and say everything will be better, hope for the best,
Mm-hmm.
always hope for the best, but do not assume this will work well or seamlessly or peacefully. Keep your eye on things. When you see things that disturb you, say it. If you see things that you think are promising, say that too.
Yeah.
But I think a measured hopefulness based on what you remember of the past is okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, your thoughts on America, and I want to see if this is still. We're going to double down on this. With all her harrowing flaws, we have always been a violent country. For instance, she deserves from us a feeling of profound protectiveness. Our great job as citizens is to shine it up a little, make it better, and hand it on safely to the generation that follows, and ask them to shine it up and hand it on. I think that is often what I was trying to do.
Yeah. That is from my book. I meant that from my heart. I just think that's our job. Stay involved. You are a citizen. Keep your eye on things. Those people in Washington work for you. You have a voice. Raise it. Be on the case. That's good. And it's also your job. And it's part of make this thing better and hand it on peacefully and as whole as you can, and ask your kids or the next generation, make it better.
We're going to talk about the book in a few minutes. Just a couple other things. You were on Morning Joe last week, my favorite show, and you talked about how the Democrats have kind of seeded their three pillars, which I found very, very interesting. Talk to our audience about the three pillars.
Well, the Democratic Party, when I was coming up and you were coming up, was recognized by regular people on the street to stand for a few things. I would say three things essentially. Number one, they were the party of the little guy. The day I called my mother and told her I was going to go to work for the president, Ronald Reagan, I said, Mama, there's some big stuff going on here. I'm going to go to work for the president. She said, the president of what? I said, the president, a realistic question. I said, actually, the president of the United States. And she said, isn't that Reagan? And I said, yeah. She said, isn't he a Republican? I said, yeah. And she said, but we're for the party of the little guy. That was the sound of Brooklyn 1950, the year I was born. And that was Brooklyn Irish Catholics. Donny, you know our sort.
I'm born in Queens, so it ain't that far, as they say.
And the same ethnicity, all of the first and second generation Americans of that era just joined the Democratic Party. You looked and saw the Republicans were a guy with a monocle, or he worked on Wall Street.
White buck shoes.
Yeah. And the Democrat was a working man with a lunch pail, and he had 5 kids. And so which side are you on? The guy with the lunch pail and the 5 kids. This was an easy question. So the Democrats, they're the party of the little guy. Number 2, they were the party of generous spending. From FDR in 1932 onwards, it was take this federal wealth and help people with it. Number 3, certainly as of the 1960s, when you and I were coming up, it was the anti-war party. It was the party of George McGovern in 1972 in his acceptance speech saying, come home, America. Come home from your foreign wars. See to our troubles here. That was George McGovern, Democrat, in 1972. I'll never forget it. I was 21 at home watching.
No, those were the days of landslides. Those were the days of landslides.
Right? Well, yes, and that poor man, he was the target of a landslide. A lot of things fell on his head. But anyway, party of the little man, party of generous spending, party of anti-war. That's what the Democratic Party was. It has changed. Donald Trump took, I'm the party of the little guy. Donald Trump said, you think you can spend? Hold my beer. And as for foreign wars, Donald Trump says, I don't like them. These too long, stupid, unwon wars, any war, I don't like them. I'm going to solve the wars. I'm going to say they're over. All right, fine. Democratic Party lost its 3 pillars. So what's it going to do, Donny? It is either going to rebuild those pillars or get itself some new pillars. But as it is now, I think people on the street might say, well, the Democrats, they're sort of a little more kind of the kind of left woke sort of stuff. And they would also, the more sophisticated ones would say, they're the party of the teachers union. And gee, after the pandemic, we don't feel so good about the teachers union. So the Democratic Party's in a fix.
They're in a fix. Here's the interesting thing, and I've done a lot of rants about step away from woke and they've lost their way. But do we sometimes dig too deep and it is as simple as every party is broken until the right transformative messenger comes along? Whether it was Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, or Donald Trump, all very different, but all having the ability to turn to people and go, I feel you, I will solve your problems. And that if there was a different, and I think Kamala Harris ran a very competent campaign, but there was not that emotional connection that happens, that she spoke and you didn't lean in, and she didn't have that it thing that the folks I mentioned have. And is that kind of an accurate postmortem, in addition to, yes, the Democrats lost their way and they were talking about trans athletes and blah, 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 blah?
I have slightly mixed feelings about that. It is absolutely true that when a generational political talent comes by, he, or in the future she, will be able to force change within his party, that is change that is popular and that might grab the American people. FDR was a generational talent, Ronald Reagan, JFK, Barack Obama, I think, and Bill Clinton also. So they were people who helped solve the dilemma of what their party stood for just by standing for what they stood for and defeating everybody else. So that's powerful and that happens. But sometimes in life, the Republican Party, between the death of Lincoln in 1865 and the rise of Teddy Roosevelt in 1901, kind of had nothing going on and just sort of eased along for 36 years. Sometimes in life, you can't wait for the hero. I think sometimes in life, you got to become the hero, or look hard and find a hero and back him or back her. But I think you're quite right that, my read on Kamala in part was that she didn't know what she was about. So she couldn't win you over to see it the way she does, because she wasn't sure how she sees it. And that will never work in a great democracy.
Before we get to the book, one more current event thing. You recently wrote about what I call his bipolar cabinet picks at this point. There are some real solid ones. Marco Rubio, Elaine Stefanik, his new Treasury pick, my friend Howard Lutnick, legitimate, competent picks. And then there are the kind of the scary ones that you just go, is he just putting his nose and thumbing his nose? I'm curious, handicap, what you're reading into his very, very varied degree of picks, or would we have that with anybody? We just overanalyzing, and anybody's going to pick a bunch of cabinet members. There are going to be some kind of really questionable ones and some really strong ones.
Yeah, well, there will always be that. There's also the sense of Mar-a-Lago as an extraordinary king's court, where young princes are gathering, and they're the Prince Edward faction, and they're trying to get the king's eye and trying to get his support. We've never seen anything like that jockeying. No. I am fascinated that a friend of mine who was there said that another friend said, why don't you guys just leave? He knows who you are. He knows what you've done. Let him phone you. Go home.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to be out of his line of sight. meaning you just better be there. Okay, that's strange enough. Every cabinet is a mix. Donny, cabinets aren't quite as important as they used to be in
Yeah, there's
helping presidents make decisions.
a few positions, maybe. I mean, obviously
Absolutely.
defense and
Absolutely.
treasury and state, and after that, it kind of falls off.
Totally. The actually,
and justice also, obviously.
Yeah, my headline at the moment is how Trump and his team seem to be balancing off the pieces of their coalition in their picks very often. Establishment Wall Street folk get the Secretary of the Treasury, wild-eyed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. kind of populists of the left get RFK Jr. with a cabinet post. The only two, I guess, that have alarmed me, and I'm open to be alarmed about a third. Matt Gaetz alarmed me. It was obviously a childish, immature, rubbing it in your face, I don't care what you think choice. In a 50-50 nation, you make an I don't care what you think choice? Ridiculous, absurd, destructive. Glad he's out of there. Pete
Hegseth, yeah.
That seems... he's fought in our wars. A tour in Afghanistan, a tour in Iraq. Decorated for bravery. Attractive young man. He's on Fox on a morning show. He's a culture warrior. He writes culture warrior books. That's fine. That's all good. But Secretary of Defense, no federal government experience beyond being a soldier for his country. No large bureaucratic experience. No experience in running anything large. Young, the kind of young that, sometimes in life when you're starting out, you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know.
If you knew what you didn't know, you could make up for the deficit and learn it. But when you don't know what you don't know, oh my God, you're in trouble. So this seems to me just not a sober and serious and constructive choice. It just doesn't to me. And I don't know what will happen there. Tulsi Gabbard, I simply haven't followed her career and her essence and who she is as a human being enough to have an opinion. But I gather those will be interesting confirmation hearings also.
Yes, so let's get into the book. Certain Idea of America. What made you? I read an interview somewhere where you said people had kind of come to you. Why don't we do a compilation? What made you kind of pull the trigger now?
What made me pull the trigger was I had to decide soon. It was only 6 months or so ago that I was asked, and what made me decide to do it was reading over the columns that would be under consideration and thinking. Loving more of them than I understood I had. Just reading them over and loving them and having fun with them. And I sat down with my editor and we just went through 400 of them. And if she loved one or I loved one or I said, gee, I loved writing that, or gee, man, I really felt that. I was passionate about that. It was in, if not. And it was just fun to look at it all, to see so much of it wasn't about politics. I don't think I understood that. To discover some new obsessions. I don't think I quite understood how obsessed I am with the Civil War. But the Civil War is a theme through this book.
I was going to ask you, what did you learn about yourself when you kind of go, okay, here are my favorite children, and I love all my children, but these are the ones I felt were the most special. What did you learn about yourself through that process?
This is an auspicious year for me, Donny. I will soon mark 25 years as a journalist for the Wall Street Journal, so that's a big deal to me.
Yeah.
But I also just went to the 50th anniversary of the first all-news class of writers and producers and on-air talent of WEEI AM 44 on your AM dial in Boston. So it is my 50th anniversary this year as a professional writer. And I don't feel I'm not ashamed to date myself. I'm kind of
Hmm.
proud. This has been a lot of stuff and a lot of work. And what the heck? I like it. Um, I think what I discovered most in pulling this book together was that from the very beginning of my career as a writer, what gave me most pleasure was sharing honest praise of outstanding individuals or people who had an outstanding moment. To call it, to say I love inspiration is not quite it. I am moved by human beings who, against the odds, do good and
Yeah,
are impressive and make it better.
you have the book's divided into 7 categories, and one of them are the people that kind of just caught you, whether it was Teddy Roosevelt or Kenny Langone or Rain and everything in between. I love Kenny Langone, by the way. I see him at Michael's. What was it? What's the thread of the people? If you kind of were once again doing a little postmortem, you're looking, okay, look at this very Paul Simon, a real myriad of people. What was the thread that they inspired you? That they inspired people?
Lonely courage. Lonely courage, not seen by others or not seen by others at the time of the greatest courage, and also what it took from you, the psychological toll of doing the right thing, the nerves Margaret Chase Smith felt, the understandable nervousness, the anxiety that Margaret Chase Smith felt when nobody in the Republican Party would go up against this guy, this creepy little senator with a list of names in his hand, called Joe McCarthy. Well, she did it. She did it alone. She did it in the well of the Senate, on the floor of the Senate. And she said, this is not good what you're doing, and it's phony what you're doing. And we do have a problem with communist infiltration in the government. We know of some examples. But you're walking around with your list of 44 names or 289 names. Man, I've asked you for that list. That list is just a bunch of garbage. So, man, she went up against not only Joe McCarthy, a rising power who had serious support for some serious reasons.
Sure.
But Donny, she was up against her party, the people who had helped her become a congresswoman and then a senator. And she was a woman among, one woman, 99 men in a clubhouse, clubby atmosphere where the men were meaner bitches than the women. So, she had guts. And when I read about these people and remember things I've heard and realize that so-and-so knew her at the end of her life, I put together a column that tells you what she did, and it makes me happy because it feeds us all, but it feeds younger people with the food of it is possible to do it right.
Some of the other categories. This is not a very prolific question, but it's the best way to get people to understand the book. Talk to me about each category and kind of one that jumps out at you that is kind of the one that just right now as you're sitting there, and if I said to you, okay, in each category, what's the one that jumps out?
Well, I loved writing about, finally at the age of 70 or so, reading War and Peace, which I had avoided all my life because it's a big book that thick. And its history and patronyms and the Russian imperial court and what could be more boring. I had no idea, but I got it in my head. You can't die without having done certain things like read War and Peace. And I already liked Tolstoy. So anyway, I read it and I discovered, oh my God, it's about life. It's not dry and cerebral and tortured like a Russian novelist. It's not theological and full of the depths. It's about the party. It's about society. It's about fun and romance and battle and high strategy and what an SOB Napoleon was. It was just the greatest. I was so happy to write a column about it. Gosh, I remember a feeling of poignance. There's not that much of Donald Trump and Joe Biden in this book.
Well, you
But
do talk about Biden. There's
yeah,
one really compelling essay that, like, dude,
yeah.
you should have gotten out. You know,
Oh,
this was under the category of, I forgot the exact term, but of just like mistakes made or things like that. He stayed his, the world. We might be looking at a very different world if after the midterms or after his last run, he did not run again.
oh my gosh, he would be being thought of fondly and with great affection on the streets of America if he
Yeah,
had done one term, if he had done everything he thought right or practicable or practical in his one term, and then stepped back, opened up the floodgates, and said, guys, have a primary, pick somebody who's not me. I will help that person as they run, and let the party battle it out. It would have been exciting. It's always exciting to see a great political battle
sure.
over serious things. So anyway, it's just too bad how it turned out in that deflated, sort of defeated way. But I thought, Donny, I include a column that makes me look very foolish because I wrote it in 2019, I think, and I said it was to Joe Biden, and I said, don't run. It's
Yeah,
not going to work. Of
yeah.
course it worked. It worked splendidly. And he
Yeah.
may have been the only Democrat who could beat Donald Trump. But I didn't think it was going to work because my thinking was not utterly irrelevant. I think you can say at this point. I thought the progressives of the Democratic Party were just going to make him miserable. I had no idea that he would make as much common cause with the progressives as he practically could, and see how that goes. But anyway, I told him not to run, and I remember with a feeling of poignance my column on Donald Trump, written in I think early fall of 2016, that was poignant for me because I had agreed with so much of his rebuking of the Republican establishment. And I agreed with him on illegal immigration. And I hated to say that I can't vote for him. And I couldn't because I think he's a nut. And
Hmm.
and I think that column begins with the sentence, he's a nut and you know he's a nut. And then it
Well,
sort of
that's
tried.
the
Yeah.
one thing about Trump you got to give him. He is transparent. I mean, what you see is what you get. I mean, which
No.
is a little scary right now because some of the things we've seen are a little scary. But what you see is what you get with that gentleman.
Yeah. Unlike Kamala Harris, you never had the impression he was
No.
hiding what he really thought.
Yeah.
You know? So, and there you are.
And no book in 2024 would be complete without a Taylor Swift thought. And you
Yeah.
talk about Taylor Swift in the book in one of your
Yeah.
columns.
Yeah. About a year ago, Time magazine, which it still matters to me who Time magazine puts on its cover as person of the year. I always notice, and it always crosses my mind, who will it be this year? I think this year we know who it will be.
Oh, I
But
think so.
last year it wasn't so certain. And I thought, I'm just going to tell Time magazine that the person of the year is this young woman who's been around for about 15 years. And she's on a tour. And on that tour, she's going to make $1 billion. And wherever she goes, whatever town or city, she actually changes
The economy. Yeah.
the economy of that town or city. She works like a dog. This tour would
2
kill
years.
anybody
Right.
else.
Right.
And her shows go 3.5 hours.
Right.
And on top
They're
of
events.
everything
They're
else,
things. They're things. They're not even a
God,
concert.
God.
It's a ways for families to energize together, to celebrate young women, to celebrate family, to celebrate. It everybody that goes is touched in incredible ways. It's amazing.
Have you gone?
I have not
one?
gone. No,
I have
not.
not either, but
Okay,
I
right.
followed it online. I followed
Yeah.
the fathers at the back of the stadium dancing with their daughters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started to hear anecdotally about a year and a half ago that people were like saving up money to take their daughter to Taylor Swift in Austin, Texas. And I thought, what is this? Anyway, I followed her whole story online and through journalism that was following her in magazines and news reports. And I said, you know what? This little girl is John Bunyan. This little girl is like an American mythic character.
Paul Bunyan.
Paul Bunyan.
Right.
Yeah, just God, I'm thinking of another mythic character whose name I can't hold on to. But there's a
John Henry.
John Henry, thank you
Lou,
so much.
Lou for the assist. Right, there you go.
Yeah, steel driving man. I mean, this girl is Joe Louis. She's just fabulous. And on top of everything else, she's falling in love with this guy, this football player, and he's going to be in the Super Bowl.
It's just amazing.
I just celebrated her, and I said, Time Magazine, you are putting her on your cover.
And they listen. So the book is a celebration. The title is a very kind of prescriptive title. What would be an alternative title for the book if you didn't come up? Tell me why you named it what you did, and tell me what an alternative would be.
I could have called it These Are the Things I've Been Writing.
Okay.
And I could have called it, oh my gosh, Moving Lives Move Me. But I called it A Certain Idea of America based on the famous first sentence of the war memoirs of Charles de Gaulle,
Right.
who had written, this enormously detached and stoic and yet mystical character. Charles de Gaulle, his plain first sentence in his war memoirs was, all of my life, I have had a certain idea of France. And when I read that years ago, it hit me like a hammer because I had total identification with it. All of my life, I've had a certain idea of America, that it is good, that it is a step forward in the history of man, a real political achievement. Baby, protect it and keep it going. No, it's history. It's real history. Not made up stories. Love it anyway.
The runaway bestseller, A Certain Idea of America, A Certain Treasure of America, is Peggy Noonan. I know how busy you are, and I so appreciate. I'm really honored that you took the time to talk to me.
Oh, Donny, you are my friend, and I like you so much. And we are Morning Joe veterans, and I love the sight of your face. So there you are.
Thank you. You stay well, my friend.
Thank you. You too.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.